Ladies and gentlemen, can I ask you to please take your seats? Good evening, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the American Turkish Friendship Association and the Rumi Forum's Fairfax chapter's annual friendship dinner. We are very delighted to have you all with us this evening. As you can see, this evening there are Turkish and Ottoman cultural art exhibitions and amazing Turkish cuisine on your tables. Later in the evening, we will have an expert Turkish calligrapher do some calligraphy for us and give us a performance. And then we have a treat for you in the back of the room at the end of the evening. So now, I would like to invite you all to enjoy your meal and the conversation at the tables, and we'll see you back shortly later in the evening. Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me okay? Yeah? Hope you're enjoying your meal. Right now we're going to watch two video presentations on the work of the American Turkish Friendship Association, followed by a video on the work of the Rumi Forum. So please direct your eyes to the screen here at my left and to your right.
Yet seek the common principles and values through which they can exist in harmony. The Rumi Forum, in congruence with the programs with communities of different faiths and cultures.
Ladies and gentlemen, now please join me in welcoming to the stage Ahmet Tarık İlhan, President of the American Turkish Friendship Association.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the American Turkish Friendship Association, it's my great honor to welcome all of you tonight to this wonderful and important event. As the American Turkish Friendship Association, ATFA, we have been serving Turkish Americans and friends of Turkey in Washington D.C. metropolitan area since 2003. ATFA is dedicated to promoting better understanding and community relations between Turkish and American communities, as well as better relations between Turkey and the United States. To this end, ATFA organizes social, educational, and cultural activities, such as morning conversations, luncheons, dinners, holiday celebrations, panels, seminars, conferences, weekend and summer schools, intercultural trips, art exhibitions, health campaigns, and much more. Dearest guests, as you know, dialogue is one of the most effective means in the struggle to overcome bigotry, prejudice, and fanaticism, and this is only possible when we respect one another's humanity and individuality. Thus, knowledge of the other in their cultural settings is essential. By recognizing and respecting social, cultural, and religious diversity and exchange of mutual values and the union in collaboration, humanity ultimately will be led to unity. Ladies and gentlemen, the main purpose of this annual event is to promote intercultural dialogue and friendship by bringing people from different cultures, ethnicities, and backgrounds together, and to celebrate our diversity in our community. By joining us this evening, you have shown your support and friendship to this cause. Thank you very much for that. I would like to conclude with a quote by former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. He said, "I see dialogue as a chance for people of different cultures and traditions to get to know each other better, whether they live on opposite sides of the world or on the same street." Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, now please welcome Dr. Angel Rabasa. He's a senior political scientist at the Rand Corporation.
Well, I'm really very, very pleased to be here, and I'll I'd like, first of all, to thank Emre and the organizers of this very important event for inviting me to say a few words to this very distinguished audience. As some of you know, for several years, my wife Roseanne, who regrettably could not be here today because of a previous commitment, and I had been coming to events organized by the Rumi Forum. I mean, we went on a cultural trip to Turkey some years ago, and we came to appreciate the exceptionally important work that many of you had been doing, inspired by the teachings of Fethullah Gulen, to promote understanding among different peoples and religions. And I have a particular interest in Turkey because I was Turkish desk officer in the State Department back in the early 80s. So I had been associated with Turkey in one fashion or another for some 27 years now. So I'm very, very happy to be here now and have this opportunity to talk to you. The subject that I was asked to speak about is of course, one very close to the work of the American Turkish Friendship Association and the Rumi Forum and other organizations around the world that had been inspired by the teachings of Fethullah Gulen, and it's the subject of tolerance. In pluralistic societies like the United States, except for small fringes on the margins of the population, we all value religious freedom and tolerance. And of course, tolerance is defined as acknowledging and supporting that individuals have the right to their own beliefs and legitimate practices associated with those beliefs, but without necessarily, this is a definition for a dictionary, without necessarily validating those beliefs and practices. So one could be tolerant, but without necessarily respecting the legitimacy of someone else's belief. It's a sort of passive thing, not to interfere or to prevent others from, exercising their beliefs. So it seems to me that tolerance is a core value. I mean, you have to have that in pluralistic societies that we should all strive for, but it's not enough. It's too passive a concept. It implies, as I said, refraining from interference with other people's legitimate beliefs, but not an active stance in support of common values. And what I have seen in the educational activities of the schools associated with the Gulen movement that I had visited in places as diverse as Bosnia and Australia, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment, in the cultural activities of organizations like the Rumi Forum, in the movement's engagement with representatives of Christianity and Judaism, is much more than tolerance. To me, these activities represent a very active stance in support of religious pluralism and respect for other religions. As the film said, it's a fight against prejudice, against intolerance. So it's not just tolerance. I think that what many of you are doing, it goes far beyond that, and in a very, very constructive ways. Now, for instance, when I went to Bosnia, a visit to Sarajevo on my business, and I was able to visit one of the schools that Gulen movement had built in Sarajevo, and this is a country that was devastated by war not too long ago. I mean, you can still drive through Sarajevo, you can see bullet holes in some of the buildings in the center of the capital, where the infrastructure was destroyed by the war. And I was so impressed by the school, state-of-the-art school. I mean, as good as any school that I have seen anywhere. And of course, it's not just for, for students of Turkish background or even for Muslims. Everybody is accepted in this school. In Australia, Henley helped to organize a visit to Auburn, which is, of course, a community in Sydney, one of the suburbs of Sydney, with a very substantial Turkish population. And in fact, he was telling me that they have a very large mosque on the Ottoman, in the Ottoman style, and I'm told that this is the largest mosque in the Southern Hemisphere. So I went there, I visited the Dialogue Center, which conducts many of the same activities that the Rumi Forum does here. There is an Islamic education center that is associated with a major university in Australia to teach about Islam. So the university selected this institution to teach Australians, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, about Islam. And of course, one of the schools that's one of the major vectors of activities of the movement. So I was, again, very impressed by this active engagement with the world. I mean, it's not just a question of being tolerant, but of engaging and doing things to make things better. And I thought that these activities reflect values that are intrinsic to Turkish culture, but also to American culture, and that these values are particularly important in an era of globalization, when the distance between peoples and countries has been erased or much reduced by technology, and where we increasingly find ourselves in multicultural and multi-religious settings, where there is an ever-increasing requirement to understand each other. And this is the work that you are doing. It's very important also in the context of democracy, because I thought that, being a political scientist and studying international relations and such, that in the studies that I have done of Muslim majority countries like Indonesia and Turkey, is that the consolidation of democracy requires the creation of a civil society. A civil society is, in the United States and in the West, and increasingly in countries outside the West, the foundation of democracy. And what you are doing is to create civil society. Civil society is composed of voluntary associations independent of the states. It creates space for individuals to do what they need to do. And so you are contributing, not only the work that you're doing here, but the work that's being done in countries around the world to create this culture that places value in the separation of religious and political authority, that supports democracy and pluralism, and that is crucial to the consolidation of democracy in countries where, as you are aware, democracy is struggling to emerge. So with that, I'll close again with my congratulations for the very positive work that you are doing. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to now ask Emre Cilic of the Rumi Forum to come to the podium to say a few words. Please welcome him.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends, and most importantly, I want to address and thank each one of the volunteers at the American Turkish Friendship Association and the Rumi Forum. It is through their fine efforts that such evenings come about. that allows us to enjoy each other's company and to make new friends. Thank you, one and all. Of course, the essence of these two organizations, and really the essence of this evening, is about bringing people together, about overcoming ignorance, and many times it's an innocent ignorance that we have lack of knowledge of the other, people of different backgrounds, whether it be race, faith, or otherwise. And it is these types of events that allows us to bring together to overcome those situations, that allows us to build those bridges, that allows us to form those friendships. It was Abraham Lincoln that said, the best way to get rid of your enemies is to make them your friends. So that is the approach we at both ATFA and the Rumi Forum have, to look at people in two ways, as friends and potential friends. That's how we see all people, as friends or potential friends. And with this psyche, we've been, I believe, from the feedback we receive, quite successful in instilling this in ourselves, in our members, and hopefully it catches on in the wider community. I want to end with a quote from our Honorary President, and I thank and acknowledge the President of ATFA as well, Tarik Ahmet Can. And really, beyond the concept of getting to knowing one another, the next step is about coming together and working for a better community, a better society. So this is the first step in a long journey, I believe, in collaborative efforts. That first step is about knowledge, is about knowing the other, but hopefully beyond that, it is about collaboration, it is about cooperation. So I'll end on this. Above all else, just as God wove the universe like lace on the loom of love, the most magical and charming music in the bosom of existence is always love. The strongest relationship among individuals that forms family, society, and nation is love. Universal love shows itself throughout the cosmos in the fact that each particle helps and supports every other particle. Thank you and have a most wonderful evening.
It is now my honor to ask Dr. Pym Valkenburg. He is the Ordinary Professor of Religion and Culture at the Catholic University of America. He's a very good friend. Please welcome him.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really honored to be here. Maybe some of you have noticed that I arrived only 10 minutes ago because of the traffic in the center of the D.C. area. And since I'm newly appointed to a university in the northeastern part of the D.C. area, you can imagine that I had some trouble getting here in time. I'm sorry for that. Tonight, we are celebrating a dinner of friendship, remembering the importance of living together as an act of intercultural and interreligious dialogue. And since I am appointed to teach about interreligious dialogue here in the DC area, I thought the best for me would be to tell you a little bit about how I understand this dialogue as a contribution to our living together here. This morning I taught a class about the documents of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, which is one of the organizations in the Roman Catholic Church that deals with relations with other religions. And that council has published a number of documents in which it discusses the relation between, and now I'm saying something that probably some of you will find very strange, mission and dialogue. On the one hand, that seems to be very strange and even a problem. If it is true that dialogue means, first of all, to be open to another person, to listen, and mission we usually think about as first of all, talking to someone. And of course, you know that Christians and some Muslims really can talk a lot to others about that. So these two seem to be contrary to one another. The idea of mission seems to be contrary to the spirit of dialogue. Yet I think in the two traditions that I know a little bit more of, Christianity and Islam, they have everything related to one another. Of course, mission or proclamation is, or evangelization are some of the words that are nowadays used. In Christianity, dawah is the term for Muslims. And I've been trying to tell a little bit about that to my students. And what I found interesting in thinking about that, and that's why I want to bring this up this afternoon, or this evening even, you can, I'm still behind in my clock, sorry. That's why I want to bring a little bit about that here also, is that the documents give a kind of an idea of what mission should be. Of course, we immediately associate mission or dawah, if we talk about the Muslim side of that, of proclaiming the gospel, proclaiming the word of God in the Quran, to other people and telling them the truth about it. Now, the interesting thing is that these documents have a much broader take on the idea of dialogue. They say, well, first of all, it is to be a presence. So it is to be being with people, communicating with people. And one of the interesting things is that I've done some study of medieval texts. In Latin, the word communicare, from which our word communication comes, means much more than just to communicate. I mean, if I'm texting while sitting in the car with Jenna saying, yeah, I will be coming in half an hour, I'm of course communicating. But this Latin word communicate, communicare, meant in fact to be friends with one another and to deal with one another and to live with one another in a friendly way. And in an open way. And therefore, you had all kinds of questions in theological works in the Middle Ages. Can you communicate with Muslims? Can you communicate with unbelievers? I mean, that's, of course, the terminology that they use. So I think every form of communication begins with a kind of a friendship. That's, of course, not always true. I mean, I had to send an email to a student who wanted to change the date of her exam next week because she apparently, her brother is graduating, and she only thought about telling me that yesterday. Well, that's, of course, not a form of communication that is based on love and friendship. But I think it's something to bear in mind. Maybe if we communicate, in all the communication that we do, that this basic idea of living together and this basic idea of listening to one another and being present with one another is at the background of that. So I think the basis of what I try to tell some of my students about as intercultural and interreligious dialogue is to be present with people, to go out of your own comfort zone, as we say nowadays, or to go out of your own bubble and to visit people of other religions, for instance. So that's something that I tell my students to do. And, well, some of them will come to the Turkish American Friendship Association and to the Rumi Forum, I guess. But it is also what we can learn from many other cultures who have had a much longer history of living together than we have here in the United States or in Europe, where I come from. Of course, the Ottoman Empire, in the long history that it had, is a good example of that. The Lebanon is a good example of that. Al-Andalus, southern Spain, in the Middle Ages, is a good example of that. And I noticed that in the Lebanon, they talk, well, maybe not so much anymore, but they used to talk a lot about convivence, living together, convivencia in Spain in the Middle Ages. Now, one of the things that fascinate me in that is that you can see that there are times that we can really learn how to live together, but there are also times that it gets really difficult. My own country, where I come from, the Netherlands, might be well, not so good, I think, example of that. Of course, we had the name of being very welcoming, mainly to Jews in the 17th century in our so-called Golden Age. But of course, you know about Theo van Gogh, Geert Wilders, and some of others who are not really representative of this welcoming aspect. And I also noticed, if you look at history, the Lebanon, Sri Lanka, the Balkans, once again, there are many, and of course Spain in the Middle Ages, sometimes it went really good, but sometimes it really went wrong. So apparently, we don't have any guarantee in history that just to live together and to be friendly to one another will really bring us any further. At the same time, I think it's the only thing we can do. So I have learned in a number of experiences and in a number of occasions that just to learn to live with one another and to serve one another and to be friends with one another just gives you this basis of knowing how to find one another when things go wrong. And I think that's what happened with many of us after 9/11. That's what's happening in the Netherlands now, that people trying to find one another once again and say, okay, this is not the way it's meant to be, so how can we do it differently? And I think that's the big importance of friendship as a kind of a human way to try to keep one another's company and to keep communicating with one another in the sense that I just described. And I think that is what we can learn from one another, from other cultures, and we in the West can learn really a lot from Turkish people, but also from people in Asia, from people in Africa about how to do that. So I think that is the importance of living together, of having intercultural friendships, and also of celebrating our friendship, because there might come times when we really need one another. And let me close, just like my two predecessors did, with recalling a few words of Fethullah Gulen, the president of Rumi Forum, who is, I think, one of the greatest teachers of intercultural friendships. I think one of the things that I learned from him is friendships are based on openness and trust. A trust that is for him ultimately a religious trust. You can trust other human beings because you know that their ultimate source is their creator, who has built in us a core of faithfulness, or fitra. I think this is one thing that Christians and Muslims have in common, and that we can still learn from one another and maybe also share with those of us who don't call them faithful people. We can trust one another because we know that there is some other reality that we really can have faith in. Thank you, Matt.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you please give a round of applause for Aydin Çayır, our master calligrapher. And now for closing remarks, I would like you to welcome Chief Rick Rappaport. He is Chief of Police, the City of Fairfax. Please welcome him.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Have you ever had that feeling when you hear someone talking and you think, hey, I think he's talking about me? Well, when Emre was talking about innocent ignorance, I kind of had that feeling sitting at the table. I think I represent the innocent ignorant from, at least I did a few years ago. And I knew when I was invited tonight that I was going to enjoy a really wonderful dinner. I didn't know till I got here that I was also going to be asked to speak. And so my remarks aren't going to be nearly as polished as the distinguished and educated people who preceded me. But I'd instead like to just tell you a little short story about how I come to be here. About 3 years ago, a group of representatives from the American Turkish Friendship Association, which is headquartered in the city of Fairfax, called and asked if they could come over and just introduce themselves. And I said, sure. You know, official visits are one of the lubricants that keep Washington moving. And so I expected it would be a nice little sit down, exchange of business cards, some introductions, a little conversation, and we would move on. And that's exactly what it was. Very nice people came. We had a nice conversation, and we all went back to work. And then a few months later, they called again, and they said, we'd like to come and visit you again. And I was a little surprised But the first visit had been very pleasant, and so I said, sure, come on over. And so they came on over, and we had another very nice conversation. And this time, I was really struck by their sincerity. And we really did have a really great conversation. And it occurred to me that here's people that are headquartered in the city of Fairfax, and I said, you have the American Turkish Friendship Association here, as well as the Institute for Islamic Studies. I'd like to come visit your place the next time. Instead of you always coming to see me, I'd like to come and see you. And that really was the start of what I hope is seen as a very mutually enjoyable friendship and relationship. That led to an invitation to the Ramadan tent, which was also in the city of Fairfax. Again, I underestimated the hospitality. I expected to go, spend a little bit of time, see one or two people that I had met through the visits, and basically pay my respects, to be quite honest with you. I wanted to go and see this celebration, but I really didn't expect to be more than just kind of a bystander in the back corner. Those of you, the Turkish Americans in the room, know already that that's exactly what didn't happen. I was, myself and the fire chief were the center of attention. We were fed enormous amounts of food that was very, very good. But what really struck me is how many people came up to us and wanted to talk to us that I hadn't met before. And that really surprised me, because many times people see us in uniform and they're somewhat intimidated, and they're a little hesitant to make that approach. That was not true of people in the Turkish American community. And myself and the fire chief had a great evening that night. And we paid visits. We paid visits to the offices. We met more people. And that is a relationship that has continued to evolve over the last 3 years. And I've met more and more people in the Turkish community. That culminated a few weeks ago when I was honored to be invited to visit Turkey on a sponsored trip, and myself and Delegate Dave Bulova, who represents this area in the Virginia legislature, went on that trip. And I'll tell you, it was an amazing trip. If you get the chance to go, I would highly recommend it. I wouldn't recommend going 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, because as you can see, I'm still paying the price for that. But a couple things struck me about that trip. We ate one or two really great meals. That certainly goes without saying. But what really struck me about that trip was the people that we met there. Not just people that we met officially, but almost every night we were hosted in a family's home, and we got to meet real Turkish people with their families, and to see what that looked like in reality. And what struck me was not just the sincerity of their hospitality, but we got to see people of the Islamic faith who were struggling to practice their faith as good, honest, decent people in the same way that we struggle here to practice our faith, perhaps as Christians, as Jews, as Sikhs, as members of other faith communities. And it was a very different perspective than what we often see when we read newspaper accounts or we watch TV. And the Islamic faith is politicized, if you will. And to see those families struggling to do many of the things that we try to do here, to reach out to other people, to care for other people, to be hospitable. We talked to families who were sponsoring mission trips to places in great need, just like we sponsor here. We talked to families who were hosting exchange students and supporting exchange students, sometimes from countries like the United States, sometimes from very poor places, very poor countries in Africa. And they were literally picking up the tab for those students to come and study in Turkey, much as we try to share those resources and that generosity here. And what struck me is that we have far more in common than we have that separates us. And so I just wanted to share with you what this whole outreach effort of intercultural dialogue that I hear so much talked about, our speakers talked about, and sometimes is talked about at the 10,000-foot level, and that's important. It's important to have an overarching mission. It's important to see this as a global effort. But I also wanted to share with you what that felt like, how that impacted just one person, me, and the things that I saw and have learned as a result of. I'm kind of embarrassed to say, as a result not of me reaching out to the Turkish American community, but the Turkish American community reaching out to me and to the members of my department. And members of this community have, in the meantime, over the years, come and talk to officers in my department, come and talk to supervisors, put on some training for some of my folks so that my officers and supervisors and commanders have the same benefit of that experience that I've had. And that's been a really great thing. And so I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to say to all of you in the Turkish American community, thank you for your efforts to reach out to us, to educate us about your culture, about your faith, about your country. I have the highest admiration for what you all are doing to bring us together as cultures. And I pledge to you my efforts in helping to be a part of that solution, and I thank you for the invitation tonight.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us this evening. It's been a pleasure to host you. Please, again, don't forget to pick up your calligraphy from our master calligrapher. Have a safe evening, drive safely, and happy holidays. All right, thank you very much.